Hi, everyone. Welcome to our lecture video for week 3. Today we're talking about the roles of the police and the limits of duty that the police have, as well as duty that they have to others. We'll talk a little bit about it as we go through it. As always, the PowerPoint with all the general notes, what you see is available on Blackboard, and obviously, the readings have content, and I'm fleshing out, so really is a combination of things. So anyway, that being said, let's get into the roles of police and the limits of duties. And so first thing right off the gate, right off the bat, that we need to talk about, and is mentioned in Intro to Criminal Justice when we talk about policing, because Intro to Criminal Justice is an overview of the whole thing. But this is a chance for me to reiterate it and remind people, especially if you're interested, police functions, it is not just crime stopping. It is so much more. A good portion of regular police work is not conducting criminal investigations. That's not a typical police job. And so I want to get that out of the way right away and go, police functions are very specific. There is the crime investigation and things like that, and we'll spend literally next week's lecture is all about investigations. We'll talk a little bit about it today, but next week is a big lecture just on criminal investigation, okay? But so the other things that we need to talk about are the social service role that police actively participate in and is a part of their job in everyday activity and whatnot. And that is truly, this is something that some my students might know better than others, depending on what your job is. But responding to emergencies and providing aid, there are first responders. The police department are in that short list of first responders. When there's a 911 call, yeah, EMTs go out, fire goes out, and police go out. They are first responders. So a good social service part of the job of a police officer is responding to emergencies and providing aid, whether that means directing traffic, whether that means blocking off roadways, whether that's checking on individuals. Like, they provide a vital service and provide aid and is part of that initial first response in emergencies. So, while yes, a lot of our crime shows and the things people love tend to be the traditional policing, chasing down the bad guys, busting drugs and things like that. That's not the norm. That's an outlier. That's a specific component that's separate of all that. But a general police force, this is a big part of it. The other thing is truly, and if you've experienced theft, which is a crime, you've probably gone through this too. Assisting the community, finding lost items, searching for missing persons, and providing directions, whether it be to and from places or to services that can help. The police function is to provide a service to the community. Their job is to serve the community. So, of course, finding lost items, searching for missing persons, that's why those tend to be things that are connected also to the police station. It's not just because, oh, it's a crime. No, it's a critical component of police functionality. The community works, the police work when the community is supported. And then the other thing that is a reality is that a majority of calls to police are for non-criminal issues. When we say criminal, we're talking like serious felony type crimes. A lot of calls to police are minor infractions. They're not technically serious crime matters. Noise complaints, things like that, those aren't really crimes. They're social crimes, and that's a complicated thing. And if you want to know more about that, take criminal law. We talk about that kind of stuff there. But yeah, the police themselves function as a social service where they are meant to help maintain order for the community. And so that's like the other big component of it. They're not only social service, they are an order maintenance group. And that means that they keep the community running smoothly and peacefully. That's why I said, like, even back with emergencies and first responding, traffic control. If you've ever driven past or been near when a traffic accident occurs, police are pretty quickly on the scene and they start directing traffic. That is order maintenance 101. That is the basis. Managing crowds at public events. Why, if you've ever been to any of the big public events here in your area, you'll notice that we have police officers on duty down there. That's a component. They have to manage crowds at public events. And then, of course, and this is what was getting into the majority of calls are for non-criminal issues, dealing with public nuisances and disturbances. If there are protests and things like that, there's a police presence that is supposed to be there. In the off chance that there is a disturbance of the peace, they need to be ready to respond. Like, legitimately, this is how the system operates. This is the way it's supposed to operate, I should say. The role of the police officer and a police department within a general community is to provide services that help maintain law and order and allow for the successful operation of a community. That is their goal. Whether you are someone who is very strongly believing in the ACAB movement, the All Cops Are Bastards movement, where you believe that the police force is absolutely terrible and needs to be demolished, or you are 100% the police can do no wrong, blue lives matter, yes, this is the most important thing ever, it doesn't matter. No matter where you fall on the spectrum of agreeing or disagreeing with policing, I am here telling you and teaching you and trying to get forward to you that this is what the police functionality is, what it is supposed to be. How they individually go about these things and how public perceptions are perceived and how they change depending on certain events, that's optics. If you are really interested in how that stuff works, sociology, psychology, and race, crime, and justice. We spend a decent amount of time in that class talking about how public opinion and the way that things are shown and informed can shape opinions. Police functionality. We are talking about the literal bread and butter, the bones of police functionality. This is not in a perfect world. No, this is what police functions are. They are to maintain law and order in our community. Part of that is, yes, arresting individuals who break the law. It is also providing services to help those who need it and things of that nature. Now, of course, there's a lot more to talk about, and there's way more nuance and intricacies that we can delve into, but for our purposes and our discussion, police functioning is not just stopping criminals. It is providing a social service role as order maintenance. Okay? So, if I said on an essay, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, or on a test, what is the primary function of a police department? And you said it was for order maintenance or to maintain peace and control or order. Well, all those would be accurate. And so 1986, the American Bar Association, which is the nationwide legal requirement that lawyers have to meet the bar. If you've ever heard the bar exam, things like that, this is what we're talking about. This is the lawyers have to pass the bar exam, lawyers and judges eventually, all of them. So the American Bar Association put forward the 11 standard responsibilities of the police. And so this actually, I pulled this directly from the ABA website, so you can look it up yourself. This is the exact phrasing. Everything is here, but this comes directly from the American Bar Association. It came out in 1986, this particular thing, but they still have it on their website. In assessing appropriate objectives and priorities for police services, local communities should initially recognize that most police agencies are currently given responsibility by design or default to. And these are the 11 responsibilities or duties that police officers have, that the police department has. And this is where I say, if you are taking this class and you've never known much about policing or the United States criminal justice ways of working, this is something new. If you are familiar with the stuff, you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. But it's one of those trying to remember from a very specific standpoint, you are students learning this in a classroom. I'm a teacher teaching this to you. The everyday American citizen does not necessarily know these things. It's not something that is taught in all schools. It's not something that is just common knowledge. At one point, it was common knowledge because it was the community and the way people conversed and talked. We've moved far away from that, and so this is not necessarily as commonplace as it used to be for people to know this. So I'm saying that, this is important to know. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, this might be an exam question. Might have you identify a couple of them. But anyway, so the responsibilities of police are to identify criminal offenders and criminal activity, and, where appropriate, apprehend offenders and participants in subsequent court proceedings, aka identify criminal activity and criminals and apprehend them, period. Reduce the opportunities for the commission of some crimes through preventative patrol and other measures. Preventative patrol, we've talked about that before, and we talked about it a little bit today too. Reduce crime. Okay. Our first two things are about crime. 3, aid individuals who are in danger of physical harm. Notice, by the third one, yes, it's still related to crime, but now it's social service focused. The first two were all about maintaining order for crime. The third one immediately is no longer just that. Aid individuals who are in danger of physical harm. That's social service. 4, protect constitutional guarantees. If the Constitution gives you a right, it has to be protected, it has to be upheld. Facilitate the movement of people and vehicles. That's the traffic control stuff. Assist those who cannot care for themselves. This is an important, both a social work and social situation type thing. Assist those who cannot care for themselves. This is part of the juvenile juvenile offenders issue thing. Juveniles cannot care for themselves, and so a role of the police is to act on their stead and to be the proper, appropriate authority figure and to assist those who cannot care for themselves. However, this also means that the police should be caring for those who also cannot care for themselves that may not be adults, or may not be juveniles, I should say. This is where we get into mental health and how we've turned that to a police component. So this is where this stuff comes in. Resolve conflict. Identify problems that are potentially serious law enforcement or governmental problems. Create and maintain a feeling of security in the community. Promote and preserve civil order. And provide other services on an emergency basis. I cannot emphasize strongly enough. The goal, the responsibilities, the duty of police is to maintain order, law and order in a community. Provide social service help. Yes, identify crime and catch criminals. That's a part of the job. But that is not the job. There's so much more. And I'm really emphasizing this a lot, and I know it's definitely annoying for some of you, but I do this because as an educator of criminal justice, as someone who sees the data, who knows how this happens, a majority of students who come in wanting to be police officers go to be police officers. Students who come into criminal justice without a plan of what they want to do, most of them do not go into policing. They go into other areas of criminal justice. It's a weird subset about police, and we'll be talking about it throughout this class as we go further. But I want to bring it up here that there is a belief about policing that is not fully accurate. We need to bridge that gap between academic understanding, general understanding, and public perceptions. It's not all the same. We need to get to the understanding of what the service police provide and how we can get to that piece. Anyway, as we move on, so policing can be broken down to a lot of different sub areas, and I am going to say just right now, we are going to talk about patrol, which is a very standard basic component of policing. The social services stuff we talked a little bit about already, and they're these general kind of as needed ad hoc things. But I want to also emphasize that, like, there's a very particular role within policing that I believe we're going to be talking about later in the class, but I'm going to mention it here. So there are different roles and departments. Like, there are detectives, there's homicide, drugs, things like that. Like, there are different sub areas and teams within policing. But what I want to specifically emphasize to some people, not every department has those. Not every police jurisdiction, not every police department have those things. Depends on the funding, the size of the department, the size of the community they serve. Like, Erie Police is a fairly big police department for this direct area. So they're going to have more departments than, say, the Mill Creek Police or the Lawrence Park Police. They're all police, but some are going to have more robust departments because of the area that they serve, the funding that they have. You're also going to see a very different police department here in Erie than you would in Philadelphia, than you would in Pittsburgh, than you would in New York City. Like, this is an important component we're going to talk about when we talk about the different careers within criminal justice, within policing. But it's important to note that just because TV has, there's the special crimes unit and there's things like that. Yes, there's a level of that that's true in the world, but it's not everywhere. Not everywhere has the department resources to dedicate an entire anti-drug group. I think that's just the reality of real modern policing. Okay? Anyway, in any kind of general policing and hierarchy, no matter what, much like any other job, there is a hierarchy totem pole thing that you start at the bottom and you work your way up within a department. And for the most part, I will tell you right now, policing almost always starts at the lowest level, which is the beat cop or the patrol officer. That is the lower levels of policing. Not that it's not important, not that it's for inexperience, that's not what I'm saying, but that is usually, that's the lower levels where people start, is in patrol. And so patrol is a key component of this, and we need to talk about patrol. And so, in general, the common goals of patrol are to stop and discourage crime, catch criminals, ensure feelings of safety, help with non-criminal issues, dealing with traffic, and understanding and solving community issues. Notice, they're all things that we talked about here. They're all things we talked about here. Patrol officers are the officers that you see out and about, driving around town, walking, on the motorcycles, but not on the motorcycles. We have a particular motorcycle group, the bike cops here in Erie, or the bike patrol. So they are a patrol group, but they're especially motorcycle. It's a whole thing. But my point is, these are the ones that you see out and about every day. If you're driving around town, if you're walking around town, if you're somewhere and you see police officers, 9 times out of 10 you're seeing a patrol officer. It's a standard thing. And like I said, their primary goals are doing the exact things that we already talked about. Maintain order, watch and make sure things are going smoothly, and apprehend criminals if need be. That's it. So, specifically, the one thing I want to emphasize here within this is ensure feeling of safety. We talked a little bit about it before, and we're going to continue to bring it up and talk about it in different ways in this class, but Ensuring feeling of safety, the best way to do that is to reduce crime, period. How do you make a community feel safe? You reduce the crime rates, and so you make people feel safe. Now, some people believe that simply having police presence will ensure feeling of safety. And for some people that works. Just seeing a police officer makes some people feel more safe and secure. Seeing regular patrols makes some people feel more safe and secure. If you're like me and grew up in a not so great part of town, police officers might make you nervous. They might make you not feel safe. That's a reality. That's why ensuring the feeling of safety, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Really, the best answer is to just reduce crime, reduce the crime rate in general, but getting to the nitty-gritty and the specific details of how to make certain groups and individuals feel more secure and safe, it's a complicated, complex psychological system. We do not have a one-size-fits-all, and that comes into, which we've talked about before in more than just this class, but the Kansas City Preventative Patrol Experiment. Kansas City, Missouri ran an experiment where they did specific beat cops in particular patrol areas. They did a control area with the regular amount. They did one with random searches, or with random patrols. They did one with increased patrols and one without patrols. And realistically, the findings, the data showed that physical presence and connection to crime rate wasn't really there. Like, perceptions of an increased police patrol force did not decrease criminal activity at all. It didn't make people feel more safe. It didn't cause crime to be less common. Like, legitimately, the general understanding from this experiment is that just having a police presence does not reduce crime. Period. And so, it's true. The data's there, and for the most part, as I've already kind of talked about and hinted at, yeah, some people have different perceptions to police, so it's going to change how that works. While the data tells us that particular thing, it does show that random patrol is ineffective. So when we do patrolling, when we do actual kind of preventative work, it has to be proactive and targeted. So like I said, just having a police presence doesn't decrease the rate of crime, but the Kansas City Preventative Patrol Experiment showed us that targeted, proactive work does work. So, like, the data from it, yeah, there was no change in perception or change in the rate of crime, comparatively speaking, but when you focused on that area and you particularly worked on reducing the likelihood of crime, it had an effect. So we do know that proactive, targeted patrolling, proactive and targeted policing can work, but there's a caveat, and we'll talk about it when we get there. So, the effective patrol officer. This is just a stock photo of a female police officer. I know nothing about this person. I know nothing about this department. I legitimately put into Microsoft PowerPoint, I typed in police officer, and this is the only one with a person that came up. So I'm telling you right now, this is just a random stock image. I have nothing about this. But the context, the text on the right side, that's the important piece. So coming off of understanding what patrol looks like and understanding the duties of the police and understanding that they're a social service, our textbook puts forward in a not great way. It's a lot of very short phrases, but putting them together, there comes out to about 7 key features of an effective patrol officer. And I want to emphasize that a lot of these things are useful not just for a patrol officer. I'm saying this not just as your teacher. I'm saying this as someone who wants to make sure that you are prepared for a job when you leave EC3. Some of these skills you are learning here, whether it's in my class or someone else's. These are skills you are learning. These are important to any job. Please don't underestimate their value. That being said, an effective patrol officer understands and knows the patrol area, including streets, landmarks, and the dynamics of the area. We're talking socioeconomic, we're talking about cultural. They understand the community that they are in. If they are patrolling an area, they understand the flow. They understand what is going on, geographical landmarks and things like that, but also what kind of people are there, at what time of day, how many people are working, how many people work third shift, when is it busy, when is it not, is it a larger geriatric community, older individuals, or is it younger? Like, if you are patrolling an area as a patrol officer, you should know your area really well. It also helps you to identify when things are out of the normal. But this is in general. You should know your information. You should know your things. Know things inside and out. An effective patrol officer is quick and effective problem solver. The ability to be able to think on your feet is a vital component to a lot of jobs. But it's also just as important to not only be a quick thinker, but effective thinker. Being able to solve problems effectively and quickly will set you ahead of so many people in many different jobs. You are learning these skills, I promise you. A good and effective patrol officer is respectful and efficient. You work with the public. If you are going into policing, you're going to work with the public. You need to be respectful and efficient so that the public perceives you as a positive, not as a negative, so you can continue to do your job in the best way possible and help the community in the best way possible. In any job, if you are not respectful and not efficient, you won't last long anywhere. There's a difference between taking abuse and being respectful. You should always be respectful in a job that you are in. It does not mean that you take abuse, but you do need to be respectful. As well as an effective patrol officer needs to have a high sense of awareness of your surroundings, even when busy with other tasks. This is where I say multitasking. As terrible as a thing that psychology will tell you, you really can't multitask, they're right. You cannot dedicate 100% of your brain power to more than one thing. So multitasking is learning how to balance. Learning how to balance different things so that you can dedicate to the primary thing you're working on, but still be able to do other things if they come up. As a patrol officer, if you are dealing with an individual and you are helping them through a process and you notice a crime is being committed, your duty is to both things. You're going to have to be able to react. If you're there and you didn't notice that a crime is happening, you're not having that ability to be aware of your surroundings while working. It's a whole complicated matter, but it's important, the multitasking component of it. And I don't mean, everything is even 20% of your brain. No, you have to be able to manage and balance. This is especially true with any kind of labor and physical work, but physically fit with excellent communication skills. As a patrol officer, you spend a lot of time in your vehicle when you are driving around and patrolling. You still need to be able to be physically fit enough to physically chase and apprehend a suspect if need be. You need to be physically fit. But a big other part of this, not just with being physically fit, but excellent communication skills. Again, you are working with the public. I will tell you right now, even in a job, if you don't think you need communication skills, you do. If you deal with people, whether it be coworkers, bosses, supervisors, clients, fellow coworkers, team leads, partners, whatever it may be, if you are working with another person, you need to have good communication skills. I promise you that. A big component, especially with anything with policing and criminal justice, Mentally fit and able to handle complex situations and personal verbal attacks. Public perception is not always the greatest. Currently, right now, we are in a time where the public perception of police is more negative than positive. If you plan on going into this career field, you have to be able to take some kind of mental strain from it. You cannot retaliate and be mad at a civilian for being mad at you for being a cop. You're just going to perpetuate their own feeling about it. You have to be, unfortunately, take the moral high ground and not let it take you down. You cannot go to that level. Being mentally fit and able to handle those types of things, that's important in any job, more especially right now, like I said, in modern policing. But the ability to handle complex situations, that's across the board, every job. You need to be able to handle when things don't go the way that they should. You need to be able to handle complex situations. And then in general, a good, effective patrol officer has a strong sense of leadership. And I'm going to say this in general, if you have a pretty strong sense of leadership and you're able to self-start and do work and not need direct, constant guidance or supervision or surveillance, no matter what job you're in, you're going to be fine. A strong sense of leadership will go a long way. So this, like I said, these are just 7 general, taking from the, I think there was 14, 15 of them in the chapter. I've combined them into these 7. If I asked you on a quiz or on an exam, what are the 7 qualities of an effective patrol officer, you should be able to pull out some of these key terms. You know, deep understanding of patrol area, quick and effective problem solver, respectful and efficient, high sense of awareness, physically fit, mentally fit, strong sense of leadership. You should be able to do that. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. I cannot tell you stronger enough. This is going to be an exam question. This is going to be an exam question. This is not a glitch. This is not me doing a dumb editing thing. This is me telling you 3 times in a row. This is going to be an exam question. So when it becomes an exam question, I expect you to get a good score on this. Burn this into your memory. All right. So, like I said, we are going to touch briefly on investigations. We're going to talk more next week. That's why I put in parentheses more next week. Next week, week 4, is all about investigations. The lecture will be all focused on investigations. You'll have your first breakdown of analysis of a crime scene project, and you'll also have your midterm exam next week. Okay? So, that being said, we're going to talk about a couple of these things. These things will be on the midterm. The investigation stuff that we're talking about today, the little bit that we are, will be on the midterm. Hear me when I say that again. The investigations things that we talk about this week will be on the midterm. The stuff that we cover next week will not. I'm not going to make you have exam questions on the midterm for something we haven't talked about. This is for this week. What we talk about here briefly about investigations will be on the midterm. Okay. So, just some quick facts that I want to talk about investigations, and we'll get into the specific pieces that I have for today. And that's number 1, and I'm doing it out of order. Detectives do a lot of paperwork, and actually a big part of most, if not all, policing is paperwork. I don't know why, but there seems to be a misunderstanding and a gap where people don't understand how much writing and paperwork is actually in these jobs. If you thought that you wanted to become a police officer because you didn't want to have to write for a living, or you were like, I want to be a corrections officer so I don't have to write, there's a lot of writing. Incident reports, case logs, criminal reports. If you go into anything within criminal justice, you're going to have to do a lot of writing. It's why I know some of you get frustrated, and you've expressed it before. You're like, I wish you didn't do so many open-ended writing questions on your exams. I'm getting you prepared for, if you go into this field, you're going to have to do writing. It is a requirement of this field. Does it have to be absolutely perfect? Well, it has to be pretty dang perfect, so I'm pushing you. But there is a lot of paperwork in policing, in the criminal justice field, whether you go into law, whether you go into like law as in lawyer and things like that, whether you go into criminal justice as policing or corrections or state trooper or whatever that may be, there's a lot of paperwork. Do not think that you are getting out of writing things. There's a lot of writing that you have to do. Okay? Putting that out there. The other thing, and this is our textbook puts a bold statement out there that says about 32% of police cases are cleared, and that's kind of accurate. So I wanted to give you the most up-to-date information. So the current data, which is from 2022, from the FBI shows the police clear, which means finishing, whether that be through finished sentencing or whatever it may be, death of individual, whatever it is that led to the case being completed. Annually, murder and non-negligent manslaughter, aka anything where a person has died, 52.3% of those cases annually are cleared. Please take a second to really think about that. Of all homicide and murder and things that happen every year, according to our last data, on average, police finish 52% of those cases. While that is a majority, it is a very small majority. And that's for murder. That's the big one. Aggravated assault, 41.4%. Assault with some kind of weapon. Sexual assault, 26% of cases that are reported annually get finished. Robberies, 23%. Burglary, 13%. Larceny, theft, 12.4%. Motor vehicle theft, 9.3%. Most crimes that are reported to the police are not finished. It takes a long time for cases to be closed out and done. This is something that a lot of people in the general public do not think about and are not really aware of. And they don't think about this because it's not something that usually directly impacts them. Solving a crime, going through the process of gathering the evidence, talking to witnesses, getting statements, and actually determining and sentencing someone for or charging someone for a crime, it's not something that just happens in a vacuum. It doesn't happen over a 3-day weekend. TV makes people believe that, oh, the crime happens on a Friday and they solve it by Sunday morning, Monday morning. No, that's not normal. Most cases aren't finished. It's because of a whole host of complications. So before we talk about investigations next week, this week, before we get into the nitty-gritty of policing and what that looks like, I want you to know that, like, legitimately speaking, going into this field, there's not a lot of solutions. There's not a lot of happy endings. There's not a lot of finishing those things. It's a lot of working and setting time aside and resources and hoping that you have it. That's the reality. So, in general, some skills of investigation, and these are things that will definitely appear on a quiz or a midterm exam, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Some good skills for an investigator to have is interviewing. You need to be able to communicate with individuals, ask proper questions to get correct and full information back from an individual. You need to be able to crime scene investigate or gather physical evidence. It's understanding the nuances of taking in all of the information of a scene and being or of a particular location and what's going on, and being able to compile things together. That is a hint piece that you're going to be looking at in your analysis of crime scene projects coming soon. Need to be able to work with informants. This means good communication skills as well as being patient and understanding. But this I cannot emphasize enough to you. Note-taking. Good note-taking skills are vital to police work, to investigative work, to being a lawyer. You need to take good notes. That's all I'm going to say. All right. So in general, there are two primary stages of investigation. There's more nuance to it, and we'll talk more about it, like I said, next week. But the two primary stages are the preliminary investigation and the follow-up investigation. The preliminary investigation is done by the patrol officer, the person who is that first responder on the scene. Their job is to figure out what happened, who was present, where things happened. They need to figure out all those details. That's why I said it's not just detectives that do this work. You need to be able to do this if you're going into policing. You need to be able to look at a scene and go, okay, I see some debris from a car over there, and I see 3 people standing by, and I see this vehicle over there. Looks like there was a hit and run, and you're able to piece together those components and be able to figure out what happened, determine who was present, who were the witnesses, who was the victim, all those things, and start separating that stuff and putting the details together. Then, after you've done all that, you need to decide the next steps. How do you proceed? Is it something that you need to bring in a specialized unit for? Do you need to do further research? Do you need a detective to come in for it? Or is this something that is just a simple matter of, okay, we take everyone's statements, we take it down to headquarters, and that's it? Whatever it might be. But a component of it is deciding the next steps in that preliminary investigation. And then the other part of this, which is technically part of the first thing, but secure the scene. Especially if it's going to be something that's larger, that's going to require a detective or an additional service team, a service department within policing to come there. You need to secure the scene. That means making sure witnesses stay there and are there to talk to other people, making sure that evidence is not tampered with, changes aren't happening. You're pretty much making sure that everything is going to be there for whoever is coming. Or if it's not for someone coming, securing the scene literally means making sure that things are isolated, contained, and managed. If that's a matter of making sure that, oh, we had to block one lane of traffic and reroute all other traffic around, that's part of securing the scene. So the preliminary investigation is not just looking for the details and finding it, it's also doing some of those other things we talked about that the patrol officer does. The follow-up investigation is where the detective takes over or where the specialized unit takes over. And this is where they have to collect enough legal evidence to charge someone with a crime. Then they're going to make an arrest, secure conviction in court. They're also going to do, this is the other part, is they're going to secure, or they're going to recover stolen property and assist the prosecution for court. Their job doesn't end when they catch the bad guy. They continue to work with the prosecution to make sure that as it goes forward in court, those things go properly, as well as making sure that if there is stolen property, that the property is returned to the rightful owners. I want to emphasize a little bit about collecting this enough legal evidence. If you've taken my criminal law class, you will know that I make you do a building a case assignment where I ask you to essentially come up with enough of legal evidence to convict someone of a crime. That's what a detective does. It's a component of policing, but it's also what the detective does to help the prosecution in the court case. So it's my little connection to those of you who have taken that class before taking this class. You're like, oh, I see how they connect. And if you haven't taken criminal law yet, now you know, oh, I'm going to be doing that stuff in that class. So just a little look forward. So this would definitely, hint, hint, be a question on an exam. The 4 pillars of a criminal investigation are to confirm a crime occurred, identify culprit, apprehend the perpetrator, and gather court-worth evidence. In other words, in very simple terms, the 4 pillars of criminal investigation: confirm a crime occurred. Confirm a crime occurred. Make sure that something illegal happened. That's pillar 1. Number 2, identify the culprit. Who is guilty? Find out who is responsible. Pillar 3, apprehend the perpetrator. Incarcerate the person who did it. Catch the person who did it. Pillar number 4, gather court-worth evidence, aka make sure that you have evidence that's going to make sure that this charge stays in court and they will be sentenced for the crime that they committed. Those are the 4 pillars of criminal investigation. That is what will be our investigations conversation on the midterm. Going forward, I want to go back to something that we talked about a little bit before we started getting into investigations, because it's something that we do need to talk about a little bit more, but I wanted to talk about investigations at least briefly. So there is controversial police methods, and we've kind of teased them and talked a little bit about them already. But a big controversial issue within police methods and police activities is proactive policing. So if you remember, I said that the Kansas City experiment, preventative patrol experiment, showed us that random doesn't work, but proactive and targeted works. That's the problem. Targeted works. Targeted, proactive works. Where it becomes a problem is how we go about it. And so the controversial part of this is how we take proactive policing and how it works in practice. So there are 3 that we're going to talk about. Broken windows theory, which there's a whole slide on it. We'll talk about it here in just a couple minutes. Stop and frisks, and zero tolerance policies. So broken windows theory is fix small things to fix the big things. That's the very simple way to understand it. Like I said, in a couple minutes, we'll look at the slide and we'll talk about it more in depth. Stop and frisks. We already know about these. We've talked about them before. These are the Terry stops that come from Terry versus Ohio. Like the idea that a patrol officer, if you seem suspicious, can stop you and check your personal space and see if you have any illicit things on your person. This is a proactive, preventative police strategy. This is also a targeted, proactive police strategy, because they are making the decision to stop an individual that they suspect to be potentially going to commit a crime or committing a crime. Notice I put next to it stereotyping and a question mark. This is where the controversial police method comes from. Or this is where the argument about it being controversial comes in. Stop and frisks are very closely associated with stereotyping. A good portion of the data shows us that a good majority of people who are suspect to stop and frisks tend to be disproportionately Black or Latino males. And so that brings up a question of stereotyping. Is it not an effective tool because it's actually fueling racist ideologies, or is it actually this is where I said this is where things get a little complicated. So stop and frisks are a controversial proactive policing method, but so are zero tolerance policies. And if you grew up in the last, if you went to school and were in like grade school in the last 20 to 30 years, maybe, you might be familiar with the zero tolerance bully policy. In the last 40 years, you might be familiar with the zero tolerance drug policy, things like that. Schools did this all the time where you get caught with it and you're out. Period. Zero tolerance means that there's no wiggle room on it. Well, that itself is controversial, and we do that with policing. Zero tolerance policies are seen as too strict because the idea is, regardless of any other details, a crime is a crime, and you punish a crime. Zero tolerance policies in practice for policing is someone is caught spray painting graffiti, they get fined and put in jail. Is that fair? Depending on who you ask. That's a zero tolerance policy. So, part of what we can talk about with this and why it gets fuzzy is Baltimore, Maryland, and the Baltimore Police Department. If you know anything about policing and the history of policing and history of controversial police methods, you can point to specific things with LA and New York over the years, but Baltimore, Maryland has been a hotbed for this for quite a while now. Baltimore has been a wonderful case study that when I was going through schooling for this, we talked about. A couple people I know who went into criminal justice before I started my schooling, they talked about this. We're still talking about this because Baltimore police in Baltimore, Maryland is an interesting case study, an interesting example to talk about with this. And so part of that is that the Baltimore Police Department took an aggressive zero tolerance approach to crime. They did this, I forget when. I want to say the 90s. But Baltimore PD took a zero tolerance approach to crime. And so they were stopping everyone. No matter how minor the infraction was, people were getting stopped and taken, whether into custody or a whole host of things. And they found that it wasn't reducing the crime rate at all. It wasn't doing anything really for Baltimore as a whole. And so actually, quite a few years ago now, it's the mid-2000s, the Justice Department did an investigation and showed that the Baltimore Police Department actually had a lot of highly illegal and unethical treatment of civilians, in particular to civilians of color. There was a disproportionately high number of black individuals who were stopped and frisked constantly, and not just for people who got convicted of carrying like crime, carrying drugs or a weapon, like innocent people as well. Like legitimately, the conversations about proactive policing and why they might be controversial are deeply rooted with Baltimore, Maryland, and the Baltimore Police Department. It's not to say that they haven't tried to change or make things better, but historically this has been an interesting case study for controversial police methods. And they took broken windows theory to the extreme level. And that's why I say we talk about it on a separate slide. So, broken windows theory was first introduced in 1982 by our two authors. They were not criminal justice people, they were sociology, psychology, Kelling and Wilson. And what they did was they did a study looking at different social stratas, neighborhoods, things of that nature, and they found that the quality of life in a neighborhood directly impacted the crime and disorder of the neighborhood. In the simplest terms possible, Clean vacant lots, fix broken windows, and make the neighborhood pleasant to live in, and you're going to prevent larger crime. What they found is that when neighborhoods look like nobody cares, it creates a positive environment for crime to exist, for crime to thrive. If you create an environment where people care and they're actively involved, you're going to reduce the amount of crime. It's a social experiment. I want to emphasize, broken windows theory is not a criminal justice theory. It is a social theory. It is a social sciences theory. It's a psychology theory. But we use it in policing to understand a little bit about the dynamics of crime. So, Kelling and Wilson figured out that, hey, when people take pride in their community and their neighborhoods, there tends to be less crime. The original idea was not about arresting minor crimes, just socially improving neighborhoods to reduce crime. The problem is, general policing, in Baltimore PD is one of them that are notorious for this, took broken windows theory and interpreted it as a zero tolerance policy. So rather than addressing the social issues of these crimes, they arrested individuals for vandalism and other minor quality of life infractions that reduce smaller crimes to remove the larger crimes. The problem was, in practice, that doesn't work. By arresting the people who are committing those crimes, you're not making the community better. You're just removing the individuals who are currently committing a crime. You're not making it a better environment so that crime is less likely to occur. You're just removing the individual who was committing the crime. In practice, it doesn't work. That's why I say broken windows theory as a sociology, as a psychology experiment, makes sense. This is a sociological theory, and this is a sociological way to reduce crime. When we take it as a arrest anyone who does any kind of minor thing, you are not fixing the problem. You are not fixing the problem at all. You're just removing an individual from the situation. You have to address the problems. The problems are not the crimes. The problem is the way the neighborhood operates. So, broken windows theory, I will tell you right now, this is one of my favorite things that came out of criminal justice that I learned years ago, and I'm excited to actually teach it again in a more robust and in-depth and not robust and in-depth than I did, but I'm able to teach it to students in an appropriate way. Like, broken windows theory is socially fixing the problem rather than just arresting people. That's the trick. That's the secret to all this. So, along with, and this is related not to broken windows, but to controversial police methods, we get to talk about discretion. We've talked about it before. We talk about it ad nauseum, I swear. We talk about discretion in just about every class that involves policing. So you should be familiar with this by this point, but if not, discretion is a particular power that police are given that allows them to maneuver and operate on the job. So, in general, officers are provided with a large amount of discretion. We've talked about this in other classes. Like, a police officer has a large wiggle room for discretion. However, there are guidelines that must be followed. They obviously can't break the law, departmental rules, or ethical standards. They can't ignore big crimes, and they can't break individual rights. Like, I want to emphasize, like, those are key. Just because they have discretion doesn't mean they can just break the law and do whatever they want. They still have to follow the rules. But I wanted to break down the complicated component of this, of discretion, and why it becomes controversial. And that is, it's the balance. The complicated component of police culture is both for discretion and other parts of policing, but it's the balance. in the role of policing, there is a fine line between civilian and officer. There is a balance. Officers, when they are using discretion in the field, they need to balance the rules to follow, the community they're a part of. So, like, yeah, it's one thing to think about the rules, but who are the people they're serving? Who are part of that community? They need to think about the culture of that community. They also need to think about the environment of the community. Is it a thriving environment, or is it something that's stagnant, that's suffering? Is it an environment that is full of farmers, or is it full of urbanites? Like, who is in that environment? Who is the community? But they're also balancing their personal belief and biases. I talk about this in English class, and so if you've taken English with me, you've heard it before, but if not, let me be the one to tell you this. Having a bias is normal. Every human being has their own bias. You can't avoid it. Biases are not inherently bad, but when you just operate on bias, that's a problem. So a part of discretion for policing is understanding the balance between your personal belief and biases and what the community needs, what is right for the community, what the law says. It's balancing a lot of complex things. And it's also the delicate circumstances of each situation. If you're a parent, if you're a teacher, if you have worked in certain fields, you will know that sometimes two situations that are very similar will have very different circumstances. They might look the same on the outside, but they're not. Policing itself is very much like that. Every situation, there's a standard operating procedure and a basic black and white version of what should and should not happen, and that's what essentially the general police culture tries to do, is boil everything down to black and white for the safety of everyone. But there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of nuance. The good use of discretion comes down to good judgment. That's the key to proper discretion, is good judgment. It's finding that balance between all of those complicated things. And so truly, what I want to emphasize about good judgment for discretion is this comes from proper and comprehensive training, accountability measures, and ongoing evaluation and feedback. If you are not being properly trained, if you are not being held accountable, things are going to run wild. People, no matter who you are, need to be held accountable, need to be evaluated, and you need to be properly trained. That is the nature of anything, for that matter. And for an officer, for discretion, good judgment is the key to good discretion, but it comes from those things. And so I want to point out that the text uses examples of traffic stops, domestic disturbances, and juvenile delinquents for using good judgment based on situations. So like traffic stops, they talk about, it's high intense, there's lots of things going on, there's a level of isolation, well, not isolation, but like you are yourself with them. Domestic disturbances are very emotionally fueled, so you have to understand how to navigate that and know what's best in that situation. And then juvenile delinquents, we've talked about in juvenile justice before. We've talked about it in other classes too, but juveniles are treated differently within the system because they're still growing, they're still learning. They need to have a future. So when you deal with juveniles, good discretion and good judgment means understanding that you're looking towards the future for that individual, not the right now. So that balance, the good judgment and balance, is the key to properly discussing and understanding discretion in criminal justice, in policing. So obviously, in general, there are pros and cons to discretion, and we talked a little bit about it, so this is just kind of this could be, hint, hint, a potential essay question on a midterm exam, like a short answer question. Be like, what are some of the pros and cons of police discretion? And so some pros of police discretion is that there is some flexibility in the field. It allows officers that on the fly to make decisions and make changes that are appropriate for that particular situation at that particular time. There's efficiency in decision making because the individual is getting to choose that. So there is a level of positivity with allowing an individual to make those choices. It also definitely creates a better community relationship because then police are seen as a positive figure rather than the authoritarian, always punishing. It might be the positive spin on it. And with discretion, there can be more of a focus on prevention rather than reaction. So like with a good use of police discretion, they don't have to arrest every person for jaywalking. They can stop people and say, hey, you really shouldn't jaywalk. It's illegal. Don't do it again. Here's a citation, rather than, all right, you broke it. Let's go down to the station. No, that's focus on preventing the problem, not just reacting to the problem. Obviously, some cons of discretion is there is the risk of bias. You are putting a lot of faith in the individual person, so there is a risk of bias to come out. There's also, in direct relationship to these, there's accountability concerns. Like, who do you hold accountable? Is it the officer themselves? Is it the individual who's being stopped? Is it the department? Like, who do you hold responsible if something goes wrong? So much like discretion can be a positive and be better for community relationships, it can also influence public opinion, make the police force seem bad, ineffective, weak, pushovers. Like, pick your poison. It's very possible. They can go down any kind of one of those routes. And then obviously the other con with this is that navigating legal and ethical dilemmas. When you allow people to make decisions, you open yourself up to legal and ethical situations. This is the how do we hold someone accountable? It's the accountability concerns turned up to 11. So, yes, this very well might be an exam question. All right. So, we talked a little bit about the roles of police and specifically kind of what they do, but we need to talk about some of the limits of their power, and that really comes from the role of the Constitution. And we're going to talk, you're going to see, and if you read already before you watch this or looked at this, you'll know we're going to be talking about 3 amendments. We're going to talk about the Constitution a little bit, but so within our own legal system, the criminal justice system, we have our 3 branches of government, the federal, executive, and judicial. Within the judicial branch, we have Supreme Court, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, and those are the people that make our laws, and they're the ones that interpret our Constitution and things like that. And so there's 2 names that I want you to know for the impact of the Constitution on policing, and that's Earl Warren and Warren E. Burger. 2 different Chief Justices. They were one after another. Earl Warren and Warren E. Burger. Okay? I won't... If I ask you a date range, I'll give you the date range. But 1953 to 1969, Earl Warren was appointed as Chief Justice, and his focus as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States was a commitment to equality and civil liberty. A lot of the we have the right as a citizen of the United States to be protected from these things, from police and from anyone else doing them, we can thank to Earl Warren. Earl Warren's main focus in making statements and deciding upon laws based off of cases were all about equality and civil liberty. It was all very much the civil rights movement. After Warren, was Burger. Warren E. Burger was Chief Justice appointed by President Nixon in 1969, and he ran all the way through 1986. Burger made some changes. He still kept the individual rights, the civil liberties component of it, but he's the one that did a lot of the connection for police work. So Earl Warren is for the general community, the general population. Warren Burger did a lot for the policing. So he was tough and practical in regards to law enforcement, but maintained the individual rights. And so you might see these as true and false or fill in the blank multiple choice type questions. But the key Burger cases that I would ask you to know about in general is United States versus Leon, 1984. This is where we introduced the good faith exception. And this means that if a law enforcement officer believed, and not just like, oh yeah, I was following law. No, like legitimately believed that they were following the law while they were obtaining evidence, even if it is not fully legal, some of it is allowed in court. The good faith exception, that the activity and the practice was done in good faith. It wasn't done to just convict someone. It was, no, I believed I was following the law. I didn't know that I violated this. That kind of thing. That's a huge protection for policing. Because if you are familiar, and we'll talk about it a little bit, if you gather evidence that's illegally obtained, you can't use it in court. This was saying, well, if you got it and you believe that you were doing it legally and you were following all the steps and just something was missing, yeah, we can allow some of it. We won't allow everything, but that's an important component of policing. Michigan versus Tucker, 1974. Not reading Miranda rights at an arrest does not immediately exclude evidence. And we're going to talk all about Miranda rights separately. But I want to bring up here that Michigan versus Tucker, 74, is just because Miranda rights aren't read at time of arrest doesn't mean that any evidence that is given after that point is immediately excluded. It means that no, there's some nuance to it. Smith versus Maryland, 1979. The idea that people cannot expect privacy of information willingly given to others. If you share with someone a secret that could possibly get you in trouble with the law and they tell someone else, you cannot expect that information that was willingly given to someone else is not admissible in court. No, you gave it to someone else. You willingly gave them the information, they can use it. It's more complicated than that, but that's the basic breakdown of it. And then New York versus Belton, 1982. Police can search the passenger area of a car without a warrant if they've legally stopped the car and if it's within the reach of the driver. This is where, while yes, at a random traffic stop, they can't just search your whole vehicle no matter what they want without probable cause, but if you are stopped driving and you have a knife on your passenger seat, unsheathed, blade out, the police can confiscate that if they believe that you've committed a crime legally and it is sitting there on your seat. It is within the reach of the driver. It is technically admissible. They do not need a warrant for it. That's just an example of that particular thing, but that's what we're talking about. Those are what Burger kind of made sure that there were legal legal protections for officers when conducting investigation and when gathering evidence, so that it wasn't just, oh, you can't use that, you can't use that. No, you still have your right to your privacy, but you can't just say, oh, well, I said that in private, it doesn't count. No, you willingly told someone else. It became public knowledge. You can't go back on it. So, like I said, we will dive more into Miranda when we talk about it, but Fourth Amendment. This is right from the actual writing. You can find this online. You can go to our several federal websites, things like that. They have the full amendment broken down. They have it in the original language. They have it in modern English, whatever it may be. This comes from one of them. So the Fourth Amendment reads, The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So what does that mean? This is your right to privacy. That is the Fourth Amendment is the right to privacy. This is where the exclusionary rule comes in, where, you know, things that are gained illegally are not allowed. We're going to talk briefly. Yeah, we'll just talk about it now. So Weeks versus the United States, 1914, and Mapp versus Ohio, 1961. This is a common thread that you're going to see, and I'm not going to ask you to necessarily remember the dates or the specific cases for this, but I want you to know that a lot of times we had laws at the federal level where we'll have like a case 1914, 1920s, 1930s, saying that there are protections that people have against the federal government. Because of the way law works, we end up having cases like this where 1914 was Weeks versus the United States, and then in 1961 we have essentially the same thing, but it's Mapp versus Ohio, which extended the reach from not just federal but to state and local municipalities. And that's kind of what I want to mention, is that a lot of times, because of the way law works, it's specific about the wording. So we have a lot of cases where there was a federal ruling and then they did another one that affected individual state and local municipalities. So, exclusionary rule. All that means is that if any evidence was obtained through any illicit means, illegally in any way, shape, or form, it cannot be used against you. Not just that, but if there is further evidence gathered by one illegally obtained piece of evidence, the rest of it cannot be used. Okay? So, Katz versus United States, 1967. This extended the idea of your right to privacy to not just physical property like a house or a car. This included letters and messages and things like this. I would ask you to know Katz versus United States, not because of the letters or the not just physical property, but because it has long-reaching impact to modern times. Hint, hint, this might be an essay question. It might be, how has Katz versus United States 1967 still relevant in today's culture? How, or however I might word it. Katz versus United States said that your physical property, that you have a right to privacy, was not just your home, not just your car, not just, oh, my physical property, you don't have the right to know this. It extends to text messages and emails. I know it's something that not everyone thinks about, but if you spend a decent amount of time on your phone, I'm sure you message, text, email, instant message, Snapchat, whatever it might be. Technically speaking, Katz versus United States says that those things that you write are your private information. It is your right that police can't use what you send in a text message that is obtained illegally to convict you of a crime. Now, if it's legal, it's a whole nother thing, and that's why I say this is a this has some long-reaching impacts, and I want to emphasize that. So with the Fourth Amendment, it really comes down to the importance of arrests and warrants. Originally, there wasn't a warrant needed for a serious crime or disturbance, but as we've gotten more modern and we've adapted, police can arrest people publicly with probable cause and not need a warrant, but it must be in a public space. Police cannot enter your private property and arrest you without a warrant. Private arrests require a warrant. Big asterisks, there are very few exceptions to it, but in general, a warrant needs to be given for for a police officer to arrest someone within private property. If it's public, completely fine without a warrant as long as they have probable cause. The asterisk for private comes with exigent circumstances. This is where urgent situations where waiting for an actual warrant would cause more harm. Imminent danger. If you took criminal law with me last semester, you've heard this term plenty of times. If there is a clear and imminent danger present where more damage is going to be caused without a warrant, that is a forgivable chance for that. So, how warrants work are that, in case you've never actually thought about it, but warrants are essentially permission to arrest, search, and seize. So, a warrant, how it operates, an officer has to bring an affidavit, and if you've heard that term before, hi, this is how you spell it. AFFIDAVIT. An affidavit. Anyway, an affidavit is a list of all of the facts of a crime, and it is a signed official document that says, this is what we physically have evidence for, this is what we are bringing forward, and we want permission to arrest this individual. So the officer brings the affidavit with probable cause to a judge. And then the judge should be neutral on this, but decides whether or not to grant the warrant. If the judge looks at the evidence, it looks at the affidavit and says, all right, clearly this is okay, you have the right information and the right person, I grant that you can go to this location and arrest this person and gather this type of evidence. Or, you don't have enough, I can't grant this warrant. Okay? Please note, I emphasize this when I said with the granting. The particularity requirement or the specificity of it. Warrants are very specific. They are not general. They list exactly who, where, and what will be searched and seized. It's not a matter of you will go downtown and enter this building and do... No. It is, you will arrive at this exact address, that this is what the physical description of the place looks like. You will go in and you will apprehend this individual, name, details, physical description. You will detain this person and you will search the premises for the following items or for potential connection to crime, and you have to be specific. This is important. This is where general public gets confused. Warrants have to be very, very specific. It's why the Breonna Taylor issue, because it was a no warrant entry, that's what is a big issue. That's why we say warrants. If there's a warrant for something, it usually doesn't go wrong. If it is a warrantless or no-knock warrant or whatever, then it causes problems. Warrants have to be very specific. Now, part of that is seize. Search and seizure. Seizable items include contraband, fruits of crime, and instruments of crime. Contraband is any equipment or substance that is directly connected to illegal activity, direct kind of connections. Fruits of crime are any ill-gotten gains. So, like, if you were a drug dealer and made $30,000 and bought a big screen TV, the fruits of your crime is that big screen TV, that could be seized. And instruments of crime. The tools of the job. If you have the tools of the job, yes, that is something that can be seized as well. Okay. So, as I said, there are exceptions to warrants. Usually exigent causes. So these are like the very emergency situation. But there's also other exceptions to general warrants. So there are special needs searches. The most important or the most common ones that people understand are airport security and border checkpoints. Think about it. When you go to the airport, you get your person and your property searched when you go through airport security. Some people complain about it, but not everybody does, and most people don't think about it. But that is an exception for a warrant. They can search it legally without a warrant, and that's to do with protection within a certain area. But border checkpoints, the same thing. You don't want someone coming in with a bunch of illegal contraband or things like that. So a border checkpoint also has the right to search you without a warrant. Make sure you're not illegally smuggling. So Terry stop and frisk. We already talked about Terry versus Ohio, 1968. Essentially, if you seem to be suspicious, an officer can stop you, detain you, talk to you for a little bit, and if they believe something is on you, they can do a brief, essentially, pat down to see if you have any weapons or things of that nature, and that's a warrantless search. During an arrest, which is part of the warrant part, but during an arrest where you didn't have to get a warrant to conduct the arrest, searching the incident to an arrest. So during a lawful arrest, the direct nearby area can be searched. So like if you're on a not a traffic stop, but like an arrest on someone on the side of the road, you can search the immediate vicinity to see if they threw contraband or something out the window into the nearby ditch, whatever that might be. So like they can search an area without a warrant. Sorry, as I'm recording this, a thunderstorm is going on. So obviously, as I said, exigent situations or emergency situations, imminent danger present gives generally an exception to needing a warrant. Consensual searches. This is the one people tend to forget. You can give permission to police to search your property. If you give them permission to search your property, they do not need a warrant. If you give permission, they don't need a warrant. The other thing is the plain view doctrine, which is connected to consent, but also to warrants. Like, if it is clearly visible and it is something as a direct component to crime, they don't need a warrant for it. One of my favorite examples that a professor of mine used to teach was, if I was a patrol officer and I came to your apartment and I asked you a question, and as I'm talking to you and I'm trying to find a local drug dealer, I see a 3-foot tall bong in the background, that's plain view doctrine. I can pretty much assume I could probably take you in, and I don't need a warrant to do that. And I'm like, you're not wrong. If it's a 3-foot bong, especially at the time when marijuana wasn't even legal in this state for medical purposes, yeah. But the idea is that if it's clearly visible and it's a clear component of crime, it doesn't need a warrant. Automobile searches, probable cause is the only thing needed, partly because with automobile searches and crimes, technically speaking, and I'm not telling you this as like you should totally do this and do something illegal, there is nothing stopping an individual from fleeing the cops during a traffic stop. If a police officer is trying to search the vehicle, there is nothing stopping that individual from driving off if they have not already been detained. Technically speaking, that means that probable cause is the only thing that an officer needs for a vehicle search. Because they can't wait to gather enough evidence, write up an affidavit, and get a judge to sign off on it. No, that's going to take too long. The vehicle can be gone by then. They need to just have probable cause. And then open fields. Like, if it's not private property, you're not immune from a search. So, yeah. So, we've mentioned probable cause a couple times, and if we haven't talked about it, we probably should talk a little bit about it. Probable cause is a standard set by judges over time based on several different cases that determine the likelihood a crime is being or going to be committed. And specifically, the big piece that this comes from, and what I would ask you if you were going to remember anything about probable cause, it's Draper versus United States, 1959. It was the idea for probable causes that there are reasonable grounds to believe a crime is happening. And with probable cause, there are three terms that I'm going to tell you right now, these three terms might show up on a test. There's the totality of the circumstances, a reasonable man, and corroboration of evidence or corroboration of facts. These are three terms that are used when talked about probable cause. There are three terms that are talked in criminal justice as a field. These are important things that you should know. The totality of the circumstance is that not just a single piece of evidence points towards it, but a pattern emerges showing a complete picture. The totality of the circumstance is that all the evidence works together to explain the crime. Please hear me as I say this again. Totality of the circumstances is that all of the evidence works together to prove the crime. Corroboration of evidence or facts is that the information works together to explain each component. In other words, each component explains how each other component plays into the totality of the circumstances. You get a totality of the circumstances through your corroboration of evidence and facts. You need both of these things. That's why I emphasize these two together. The other piece, when we talk about probable cause that needs to be understood, is reasonable man. We've since kind of ungendered the word. Now it's a reasonable person. But a reasonable man, historically speaking, is an average sensible person would think the same thing in the same situation. When we talk about probable cause, it's the idea that the evidence presented, if you presented it to an everyday reasonable person, would they come to the same conclusion as you? If the answer is yes, there's probable cause. If the answer is no, there is no probable cause. Well, it was fun, but we need to talk about a component that is controversial within criminal justice and policing, and that is the use of force. And I wanted to definitely emphasize this one case. As you can tell, it's its own slide. So this is definitely another important thing that would definitely be on an exam. Tennessee versus Garner, 1985. The Supreme Court set clear limits on the police's use of deadly force. Tennessee versus Garner, 1985. The Supreme Court set clear limits on the police's use of deadly force. What this case came out to was that police cannot use deadly force to stop someone fleeing the scene if they are unarmed and not dangerous. Police cannot use deadly force to stop someone fleeing the scene if they are unarmed and not dangerous. When we talk about police use of force, excessive use of force, and police brutality as a social component, this is the case that set that precedent, and this is why we have such a general debate and discussion about it, both from strong supporters and strong dissenters. What it breaks down to is the use of deadly force against every person suspected of a felony is wrong. Supreme Court said that. You can't use deadly force every time a person is suspected of doing a felony. It is not justifiable. There's also no justification to use deadly force because a suspect might get away. Just because a person is fleeing the scene doesn't mean you get to shoot them dead because, oh, I wasn't going to catch them. No, that's not a legitimate reason to stop and kill someone. It made it unconstitutional to shoot an unarmed, non-dangerous person just because they're fleeing. Unarmed, non-dangerous person fleeing a scene cannot be stopped by deadly force. I don't want to talk about this anymore, but if you are interested and want to talk more about this particular piece and some of the more modern cases of situations like this, I would be glad to talk one-on-one, but I don't want to spend more time lecturing about this. Please note that we do have a law in place that says it's not okay, and we're still struggling with it. Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Fifth Amendment. You have protection from self-incrimination. You have protection from double jeopardy. You have eminent domain, that you have fair compensation if they have to take your stuff. That you are given due process. And for a serious crime, you are allowed a grand jury. So, this is where people say, I plead the fifth. It's the protection from self-incrimination is really what people are using it for. But it's the due process clause. It's what gives everyone the right to a fair and just trial. So, some terms in case you're not familiar. Double jeopardy is being charged for the same crime twice, which is not allowed. Eminent domain, which I already said, fair compensation. So if they have to take some of your actually owned property, that you have to be compensated for the use of said property. You are given due process and a grand jury for serious crimes. In other words, before you even get charged, there's a grand jury that overlooks everything to make sure that it is all legitimately gained and does point towards this thing. So, there is a case that I want to briefly talk about. I mentioned it in criminal law, but Gideon versus Wainwright, 1963. This is the right to counsel for indigent defendants. Indigent means that they cannot care for themselves. This usually breaks down to the poor. The idea is that just because you're poor doesn't mean you don't have the right to a legal counsel. This is what puts forward the concept of a public defender. Gideon versus Wainwright says you are given the right to have protection. You get due process. You get a lawyer to help. So this is where we're getting into Miranda rights. We're going to talk about confession laws first. Brief history overview of confession laws, and then we'll talk separately about Miranda. So Brown versus United States, 1857. Forced confessions violate the Fifth Amendment. Brown versus Mississippi. State law enforcement can't use forced confessions either due to due process. Like I said, 1857 to 1936. We had it at the federal level. Now we have it at the state level. Malloy versus Hogan, 1964. Any confession obtained through improper influence by law enforcement was deemed inadmissible in court. Confessions must be, and this is where, if you've heard this term before, or these terms before, this is where it comes from. That any confession must be given knowingly and voluntarily. AKA, you are not conversed to say it. You are not conversed to do it. You are giving this stuff willingly, and you are conscious that you're making that decision. Escobedo versus Illinois, 1964. This was the right to have a lawyer present during questioning. Think about that. If you know modern cop shows, if you know that, yeah, you have the right to have a lawyer present during questioning and things like that, yeah, up until 1964 wasn't a requirement. And then 1966 was Miranda versus Arizona. Police must inform individuals of their specific rights before custodial interrogations. So, Miranda rights, these are everyone knows them. They've been pushed to death through television and movies. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You can waive this right at any time. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, a public defender will be given to you, that kind of thing. Miranda rights are required. The actual case of Miranda versus Arizona, the individual who got off was guilty of their crime. Period. Like, I'm telling you this now. This is not a little weird battleground thing. No. The individual who was in the initial crime, who committed the crime, got acquitted of their crime because they were improperly detained and interrogated. And they had a good lawyer who fought that because they self-incriminated and they didn't know they had the right to not do that, and they didn't know they had the right to counsel, meant that they had to be acquitted, and the judge agreed with them. And so then the further case went, the case of Miranda versus Arizona went forward and said, hey, you know what? Yeah, we can't have this happen again. So then it made it required that officers have to inform an individual of their rights so that it does not potentially release an individual. So this is where I get into misconceptions. So here are the general misconceptions, and they come from the textbook as well. But arrest is invalid if Miranda rights aren't read. So Miranda rights don't have to be read at the time of arrest, just as long as it's before custodial interrogation. Custodial interrogation is a pretty big word, but it's pretty easy. Custodial interrogation means when they take you into custody and talk to you at the station. If they are doing their actual interrogation questioning at the station, as long as your Miranda rights are read to you all the way up until that point, it's fine. It doesn't become invalid if you're not read those Miranda rights at the beginning. But that is a common misconception of the general public. Another misconception is all statements made without Miranda warnings are inadmissible. It's not true. If a statement is made voluntarily without coercion, it's still admissible even if Miranda rights weren't read. Miranda rights just means if you did not willingly give the information because you were coerced and you were not aware of your rights, it's not okay. But if you voluntarily gave up that information, you can't later say, "Well, no, you can't do that." And then police must always read Miranda rights in a standard format. It's not true. It's a terrible joke because of TV, but realistically, as long as the core points are clearly presented and the individual knows what their rights are, it's all good. It's A-okay. They do not have to be read verbatim how people hear them from TV. As long as they know they don't have to self-incriminate themselves, they don't have to talk, and they're allowed an attorney, that's it. Doesn't have to be any fancier than that. So, this is where, because of Miranda rights and making sure that individuals know that they don't have to self-incriminate, this means that police have adapted some interrogation techniques that work with Miranda rights. And one of those is rapport building. I know it says report, but if you've never seen the word before, it's rapport. That's how you pronounce it. But rapport building. This is where you establish a connection. As a teacher in person, if you've had me in an in-person class, you will know I spend the first couple classes building rapport with you. I try to do it in an online class. It doesn't work the same way because we don't have that back and forth engagement. But a clear and standard component of my in-person teaching is rapport building. You establish a connection. Policing does it in interrogations too. If you make a connection with an individual, they're more willing to tell you things. The other part of this is open-ended questions. If they're in your own words, they're not coercive. As long as you're not leading someone to say something you actually want them to say, if they're open-ended questions, technically speaking, you're not coerced. You are answering it the way you want to. That's where people get in trouble. People tend to talk too much. They talk and put their foot in their mouth, metaphorically speaking. They say the wrong thing and they get in trouble for it. Yeah, it's open-ended questions. And then the other thing that related to this is observing nonverbal cues. Body language is not covered under Miranda rights. If you are nervously shuffling in your seat and you're not making eye contact in general, that shows suspicion. They don't need you to say anything for your body to make nonverbal cues for them to go, yep, they're guilty. Like, truly, they don't need to talk to you in that sense. Obviously, they need more than just physical nonverbal cues to arrest someone, but my point being, nonverbal cues are not covered under Miranda rights. All right. Now moving on to the Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. AKA, this is your right to a speedy and public trial, an impartial jury, informed of the nature and cause of your accusation, the confrontation clause, which we'll talk about in just a second, compulsory process for obtaining witnesses, and public defenders, your right to an attorney. Confrontation clause. For most crimes, means that the individual who is being put on trial has a right to, in trial, be face-to-face with the person who is coming with that claim against them. There are some certain exceptions, some sexual assault juvenile cases and some homicide cases have exceptions to this rule, but the idea is that if you are being charged with a crime, you have a right to see the people who are making this claim against you. That's what the confrontation clause is. So, what this is in practice as far as policing is concerned is this is advocacy and equality for civilians. As a police officer, as a general public person who's learning about policing and how this works, this is understanding that these are clear limits to the powers that police have. This is, as a civilian, you are allowed certain rights that the police cannot take away. And that comes with civil liability. So civil liability is legal actions against law enforcement, whether it be officers or whole departments, when their actions result in harm or violate individual rights. This is what holds law enforcement accountable for their conduct. And so this can arise from various situations: misuse of authority, excessive use of force, wrongful arrest, violation of constitutional rights. Like, if you've followed any of these things in recent years, this is civil liability. This is something that is very prevalent in today's world. This is why in a intro to policing course, we talk about this, both from the police side, which is, yeah, these are things that you need to be aware of, that there are some checks and balances, but also for civilians to understand that, hey, there are checks and balances, and this is how we keep things in check. So, U.S. Code subsection 1983, not a year, but the subsection is 1983. It is the civil action for deprivation of rights. And I have it written out. When you are going through the notes, if you look in the notes section on this slide, it'll say essay question from text and then bold, and then it'll have a whole big box of text. So it starts with every person. That is the legitimate quoted text from the U.S. Code subsection 1983. That is the civil action for deprivation of rights. It reads, every person who, under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state or territory or the District of Columbia, subjects or causes to be subjected any citizen of the United States or other person within the jurisdiction thereof to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution and laws. Notice, Constitution and laws shall be liable to the party injured in an action at law, suit in equity, or other proper proceeding for redress, except that in any action brought against a judicial officer for an act or omission taken in such officer's judicial capacity, injunctive relief shall not be granted unless a declaratory decree was violated or declaratory relief was unadvisable. For the purposes of this section, any act of Congress applicable exclusively to the District of Columbia shall be considered to be a statute of the District of Columbia. What does that mean? It's a lot of big fancy words, and it's the legal way of writing things. But what it literally means is that if any official enforcement person operating on behalf of the state or whatever it may be, if they deprive an individual of any rights that are set out to them by the Constitution or by the laws of the area, they are liable. They can be sued for compensation. There are a couple specific exceptions, which was specifically judicial officers for things within their actual line of duty things. That's where we have the, technically speaking, how bad was the violation to your own civil rights if an officer was doing their job as they needed to. This is where there's that gray area, and this is where I say this is the complicated matter. This is where a judge would have to weigh your personal civil liberty and personal autonomy versus the officer's role in preventing a crime or in doing their job. So there's a little bit of that, but it's very specific about that. And so the other thing, and this is where I said it's not just the Constitution rights, state tort laws. This is where misconduct protections, there's additional to the federal stuff. And it's where, like I said, police have certain immunities. They're being protected unless they go too far out of line. This is why we have the specification that, like, technically you can't just get away with anything. If you are breaking the rules or you do take away someone's rights, you can be sued civilly, but if it's within your technical immunities of the job, then no. But if it's not, then yes, you can be. It's a whole complicated gray area. Yeah. I don't want to talk much more about that one. But what I do want to say is I did include this in the PowerPoint for you. Well, not on the PowerPoint, but under the notes. Essay question from the text. Why do you think police civil liability is important in maintaining public trust in law enforcement? How can understanding and addressing civil liability contribute to better policing practices? I'm going to tell you right now. I'm going to use that question on the midterm exam, and that question might even come back on the final exam. This is an open-ended question. Okay? Please hear me as I say this. There is not a one simple answer to that question. That's why I like it, and I would use it for a big essay question on a midterm or final, not on a quiz. So, understanding that civil liability, that law enforcement can be held responsible and accountable for any of their potential misconduct. Why might that be important in maintaining public trust in law enforcement? Some potential thoughts is it shows that they are equally human and flawed. It might be that it offers a balance of checks and balances to ensure that illegal activity is not just occurring. It might be to build community trust and partnerships. All these are potentially good ideas that you might want to flesh out on. How can understanding and addressing civil liability contribute to better policing practices? Well, very simply, by understanding that officers are held accountable for that type of stuff, maybe there would be more comprehensive and accurate training to avoid any potential misconduct. Maybe there would be public forums and things of that nature that could help make police policy better and more visible to the public. These are just some ideas. These are not the only possible ideas. I'm just giving you a couple of them. I'm telling you right now, I'm giving you the clues and the keys to succeed on an exam. My lectures are worth it. I know they're boring, but they're worth it. Anyway, that wraps this up. Like I said, I gave you a lot of really strong hints in this presentation this time about some potential essay questions and things that will be up on the exam. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you in the next video.